Shannon, I'm Ron, Sean, and
Hi,
it's
Ron.
nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Shannon assigned me to kind of conduct this interview, and I think you will take the weight of it off of me.
I should be able to if you want me to. But you can also grill me as much as you want.
But I'll offer some context and maybe assist a little bit in getting the discussion focused. You know what you are hoping or expecting from us, and we're all pretty eager.
That's great.
You know that Robert Frost once famously said that when you translate poetry, this is a paraphrase, what gets lost in translation is the poetry. And over the years, I've taught a lot of literature in translation, Goethe, Dostoevsky, Molière, and Voltaire, etc. But I've not taught very much poetry in translation, and probably because of what Frost says, I've never been confident that I could talk about either the original language or the product in the target language with any real authority. So I think you proposed a really interesting problem for us. I'm really eager to hear what I admire your temerity in pointing up the limits in Merwin's translation. But
I know, right?
So I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say and where you found the nuances that captivated you and begged for another translation. You're on.
Okay, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sean Dwyer, and I am an ABD, alas, not a PhD, but in Latin American literature and from Indiana University. And still plugging away, hoping that I'll be a PhD like Ron at some point. But that said, I'm not just some dude who said, I want to translate Neruda. I first read that poem in a class. I was taught that poem 20, in 1980 by a really good professor, and I became absolutely enthralled with the piece. Number one, it's one of the best poems ever written. I mean, even if you're looking at the English, it's gorgeous. But this dude was 19 years old when he wrote this. Okay. And it's in public domain now, so I can publish my book without having to pay as a state anything. But so I was looking at this poem, and over the years, as I started using it as a teaching tool when I was teaching composition courses. I wanted them to do literary analysis. It's a nice compact piece that is exceedingly full of nuance. And so I was able to use that poem to teach people how to get at stuff. And from the time I was an undergrad through then, I realized several things about the original that I'd like to mention. Number one, this poem is in Alexandrian verse. So you have 14 syllables in every line. And there's a caesura in the middle, so you have 7, every line. So it's intentional, it wasn't fake. And then another thing is it may not look like it if you look at the original, but it has a rhyme scheme. After the first maybe 6 lines, I didn't refresh my memory on that. I think it's the first 6. You start to have an assonant rhyme in E-O. Let me go ahead and pull that up. So if you look, you see it on the left there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Spanish.
Yeah. So given syneresis and diaresis, not very much diaresis, there are a lot of diphthongs here and so it's really hard to detect that it's 14 syllables, but it is. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Here we go. Right here. Look. Quiso, infinito, fijos, perdido, rocío, conmigo, perdido, conmigo, etc. and one thing that I note I wrote 112 pages about this poem. And one thing that I note is that you have the assonant rhyme in EO. And I would tell my students, what do you hear when you have the wind blowing in the middle of a really dark, starry night? EO, EO, EO. So the choice of rhyme evokes the sound of the wind. Okay? So given that, what does one do? Now, when you see Homer translated, you see Homer translated in poetry, in rhyme. And you know that's not literal, because if it were literal, it wouldn't rhyme in English, coming from Greek. And so you can see that there is no attempt in W.S. Merwin to rhyme it, nor is there an attempt to keep the 14-syllable structure. And I obviously did not even try that either, because what I wanted to aim for was the beauty of the words and the importance of each little thing that he did with those words. And so I knew that getting 14 syllables and having an assonant rhyme of any sort every other in the second line of each couplet was going to be an impossibility. So that's the very first thing. Now, I first of all did not need to translate this for myself. By the time I read it, I was really proficient at it, at Spanish. And by the time I decided to translate it, it was because I had looked at Mr. Merwin's version and found it lacking. And I have a reveal at the end of my talk about that. I'm going to make you wait for that one. It's fascinating, though. Really, really fascinating. So first of all, I looked at what it said in Spanish. And los versos más tristes, the saddest verses. He wrote the saddest lines. Okay, that's not a big deal. I thought that sticking with Neruda's word, I thought there was a reason why he didn't say la poesía más triste, all right? Or el poema más triste. He said versos for a reason, so I kept it. Okay, right? For example, it's a starry night versus the night is shattered. And that's when I said, oh God, somebody used a dictionary. So let me tell you a couple things. First of all, I revere the poetry of Mr. Merwin. Okay. And so I'm not trying to topple an idol. The other thing is that there's a professor I knew in comparative lit at Indiana University, Willis Barnstone. Ron, do you know Willis Barnstone's work at all?
Don't know.
Okay. Well, Willis Barnstone did a couple of things. He would translate almost any language into English. He did a translation of one of the Gospels and referred to Jesus as Joshua ben Miriam, which is not what's written, but that was actually probably a personal prejudice. But he said in an article once that anybody can translate from any language if they have a dictionary. And I knew Professor Barnstone. He also translated Borges, both poetry and prose, to English, and enjoyed Professor Barnstone's company quite a bit. But there were he's a little bit goofy, and so what happened here with Mr. Merwin's poem version of the poem is that somebody asked him to do this. He was commissioned to write this. He didn't do it because he said somebody needs to translate this. He was asked to do it. And I don't know if he did the entire book or just this one, but this is the iconic one of that whole book. So here you have it. So Starry Night versus The Night is Shattered. How could that be? Well, folks, let me show you something. We're going to take a look at wordreference.com, which is a it has the Oxford Spanish English Dictionary and the HarperCollins Dictionary. So estrellar can mean to break. If you take a glass and drop it on the floor and it goes into a million pieces, that's estrellar. If you drive your car into a utility pole, that's estrellarse. Bam. Okay? But look down here, estrellarse. To fill with stars, to shine with stars, to be full of stars. Let that sink in for a second. The word for star is estrella. Why would it make any sense at all to say the night is shattered when he's looking up at a bunch of stars? Is there any reason for that? No. I answered the question for you. And so I thought, And then we have, and I said it, and the stars shiver blue in the distance, and the blue stars shiver in the distance. The problem here is that not all the stars are blue. The red stars and the white stars and the whatnot. And they're not the only ones shivering, but so the stars shiver, and he put the word blue, I put the word blue, because he's saying that the predominant thing here is blue. And one thing you're going to note about the poem, you may have noticed, may not, but I'll point it out, is that blue and white are the primary colors here, or the primary tones. And you don't have any warm tone. Okay, and why? These give more of a sense of abandonment than a red tone would, red or orange or yellow. And he doesn't even talk about the color of the grass. And in fact, he talks about...
Can we ask questions?
You can pop in anytime. What's first?
Blue stars shiver. Is he not just re-emphasizing the fact that we consider blue to be a sad state, and that sad shade is causing us to shiver, as opposed to the actual stars that are in the sky?
Well, no, he's talking about the twinkling of stars.
Okay.
Yeah, because he doesn't use the word that we would use for a human shivering as much. He said actively that the stars tiritan, so the stars are actively twinkling, and that may not be the only word for it, but I think he was giving us a little sense, a little bit of anthropomorphic look at those stars. It's like everything around him is distant, cold, abandoned. So the blueness, yes, he's blue. And it would be a sad color in Spanish as well, although people in Spanish don't say, I feel blue today. That doesn't exist. So, but it's still a color that you associate with a sort of a mournful state. And of course, in black, you'd wear black for mourning, and the night sky is unusually bright. But so that's a good observation, and I appreciate that. I said the night wind swirls in the sky and sings. It says the wind revolves in the sky. What happens when the wind revolves? Air works like water. You can see it with water. You can't see it with air, but you get a sort of a swirl, this a bit. But when it starts coming up with this uniform revolution, you get a whirlpool. I want to also show these other ones here. I'll make this full screen so that we can look at it better and make it a little bigger. So the poem, I don't know who translated the one on the Frida page, But they have it as stars, and over here we have the night is starry from the other, from the Chile site, whereas A.S. Klein riffed off of Merwin and said the night is fractured. And they shiver blue, the stars in the distance. Well, that is what this is on the left is kind of an awkward translation to English, because we wouldn't say they shiver blue, the stars, ever. And that's not even an attempt to have some poetic feel to it. It's just that whoever did this said, translated from Spanish, being a native Spanish speaker. The one in the middle, they shiver blue, those stars in the distance. When you say those stars, it's like you're pointing at some specific ones. Those stars right there. Yeah, those. And this is awkward.
Sean?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but
no.
Before we go beyond the stars, I just want to plug in that when I read the poem, the line that came to mind for me, and I'm not sure if this adds anything, is from Blake's poem, The Tiger, when the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears.
Yeah.
Okay. You don't have to do anything with it.
Oh, no. The stars are up there, and I mentioned later on, well, in my text on this, I mentioned that the stars express they show just the separation by being so cold and shivery, even though ironically the blue and white stars are the hotter ones. That the stars are working in conjunction with him. It really does make him feel even more alone and sad, and so there is that personification of the stars, and it goes right along with Blake. That's nice. I like that. So the next thing that happened, I loved her and sometimes she loved me too, and then down here, I loved her and sometimes she loved me too, versus she loved me and sometimes I loved her too. This is a spot where Mr. Merwin missed a little bit of nuance, because one thing that my professor pointed out to me in 1980 was that you use two different tenses for querer here. Okay, let me show you down here. Yo la quise y a veces ella también me quiso. Ella me quiso, a veces yo también la quería. That's not an accident. Okay, what happened here is that yo la quise, when you have the verb to like or love, querer, in the preterite, you're saying you have this moment of passion. So I lusted after her, and she sometimes lusted after me. So considering he's 19, these are a couple of horny teens. All right? Then she wanted me, and I sometimes loved her, had an ongoing heartfelt passion for her. Is that big enough?
Yep.
Okay. And so how not to love her great steady eyes? Okay. So what this poor guy has done is he has fallen in love with her, and we'll see that he told her about it, and boom, on. She bailed on him because she only wanted sex and he wanted love. Isn't that gorgeous? All right. So now, through nights like this, through or on, the preposition, mine is a little more to the point. His makes a good point of going a length of the night. I kissed her again and again. I like that. I kissed her so many times. That's what he wrote. then how could I not have loved her great steady eyes? Still is nice. I chose steady because I like the extra syllable, and I said I, whereas he said one. He didn't. Neruda did not use yo. He didn't use I in it, but I see it as that he's saying that it would have been impossible for me not to, and so I chose to use him. Okay, to think that I do not have her, to feel that I have lost her. The verb is sentir in Spanish, which means, yes, it means to feel. And when you say lo siento, you mean you say I'm sorry. But this is deeper than just, oh, wow, bummer, I've lost her. This is, there's anguish here. And so I chose lament. Hearing still more immense about her. And the verse falls to the snow like dew to the pasture. Oh my God. Look at this.
Is that not a typo?
No.
Oh.
Okay. It's not. I forgot about that one. Y el verso cae al alma, como al paso el rocío. I don't know where he got snow for that. Well, let me see if I'm going to have to, I'm not going to do it now, but I'm going to look somewhere else and see if he did say soul somewhere, if other versions online show it as soul. Okay. The verse settles on my soul as dew on the grass. Why settle? Because that's what dew does. It settles, right? You can say the dew falls. Yeah. And the word pasto isn't a pasture. It's the word for grass. It's related to the word pasture, but here you think a pasture falls on a field, but it's on the grass right around him. This is a very immediate thing. He's lying there looking at the stars, and he feels the dew come down.
Sean?
Yeah.
Merwin uses the word snow, and you use the word soul.
Yeah.
How does that happen? And if I missed that in what you've already said, what's the word that you're both relying on?
It wouldn't make sense that he looked up alma, and came up with snow. Okay. Good. Well, let me triple check that. Spanish to English. Alma. See if there's any chance at all that core or center, spirit, soul. No. No. Pinhead. That's great. All right. So either it was a typo on the part of somebody who put it on the internet, and then everybody has copied and pasted that. Farrar Straus has a volume that includes his translation of that poem, and I guess we could look there. But let's assume that he knew it meant soul, and not hold this against him, because this is an internet post. All right. Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. No. It's not it. So he went with shattered. The night is starry, and she is not with me. Wow. We nailed this one together. All right. That is all, or this is all. In the distance, someone is singing. See. My soul will not accept having lost her. There's a difference between not being satisfied that it has lost her, which means he doesn't believe it, right? Like, people are not satisfied that Biden won the election. I'm not buying it, right? Versus my soul will not accept having lost her gives it more agency and more of an intentionality to do something about it. Right? And some people will not accept that Biden has won the presidency, and we saw what happened then on the 6th. There's people that are saying, not sure. Those are the ones who are not satisfied, and then you have the ones who will not accept it, and they went to the Capitol. And that's the difference here. His soul wants to be militant about it because, as if to pull her close, my gaze seeks her. My sight searches for her as though to go to her. I mean, which is smoother? My heart seeks her. She's not with me. Good. Now, this is where I really realized that he was using white as white in coldness and isolation as a primary motif, which is that the same night that bleaches the same trees. And I used bleaches because of the word Neruda used in whitening them. What's happening here is that, okay, first of all, you have to think this is 1923 or 24, okay? And we have light pollution now. And so if you see light on the ground, it's from a light pole. In 1923, if you've ever, in Idaho, there's one of the officially designated dark places. You should go over there and read this poem while you're there, where there's no light pollution at all. And on a clear night, the sky is completely covered in a canopy of stars. And the moon is not mentioned in this poem, which means probably it was a new moon, which means you see the stars even better. Have you ever been, well, you've seen the shadow cast by the moon, but when the moon is gone and you're in a super dark place, the stars, there's enough light from the stars that they cast a shadow. And so they are lighting up the trees with the white light from the stars. We, those of that time, are no longer the same. I thought it was more clear, we of that time. I just liked having that in there. Okay, so now, I no longer love her. It's true. But oh, how I loved her. He said, but how I loved her. I wanted to put that extra oh in there so you realize it's not a question, how I loved her. It was, you know, oh my God, how I loved her is what I heard. Now, my voice sought the wind to touch her ear. I like that better than tried to find the wind to touch her hearing. I mean, really? It's just a little clunky, just a speck, just a speck. And I have justification for how some of this happened, and that's the reveal later on. But when he says that my voice sought the wind to touch her ear, he tried to woo her with poetry. All right, and that's why when he said she wanted me at times, I also loved her. The way he showed her was with what he did best, writing poetry. And he wrote her a poem and she said, oh my God, he's getting serious. Bye-bye. Someone else. She must belong to someone else. Now, the reason I said she must belong to someone else, and he said she will be another's, that's clearly a very different take on it. And what he has here, though, is that in the Spanish, he used the future tense here. De otro, será de otro. But in Spanish, one of the things that, unless you study grammar to a very deep nuance, you don't know, is that Spanish uses the future tense to express probability. We do in English as well. Like, let's say you're expecting company and you hear a knock on the door. You say, well, that'll be Pedro, right? And that's future tense. And it's not because he's suddenly going to become Pedro. It's because we're speculating. All right? So what he's doing is de otro, someone else's. Someone else's is probably better. But I didn't feel the need to do that because it says it right here. She must belong to someone else. And probably belongs to someone else either way. But the thing is, he said she will be another's. Why isn't she with him? She's with someone else. So it's about the probability. Okay. And now he gets a dig in. She's with somebody else the way she's with somebody else before she got to me. So she's a little hussy. That's what he's saying. Her voice. Her bright body. Let me see. Su cuerpo claro. Claro means light colored. So he said bright because if you clarify something or if you shine light on it, it becomes more clear. But we're talking here about skin tone. All right. I no longer love her, it's true. But perhaps I love her. God, there's 2 lines. I no longer love her, it's true, but oh, how I loved her. Okay, good.
Are we talking about race?
He's just saying that she's light-skinned. In fact, throughout the entire book that leads up to this poem, he talks about how creamy her skin is. But he's Caucasian as well, so there's nothing about that.
But there's a difference between the tone of our skin that touches the sun, where the sun touches, and the places out of our skin that the sun doesn't touch.
Well, in the 1920s, we were still in this time when it was elegant to be pale because that meant you didn't have to get out and work in the sun. And so, so this is a woman that, because we're just getting into the 20s, so the flapper thing wouldn't have gotten to Chile yet. So she'd be up to her neck with the long sleeves. So if he saw her body, that means he saw her body. All right. If he knows her body is pale, it's because she had her shirt off, which I never thought about that before. I'm going to have to add that into my document. Thank you.
Spicy.
I like that. Oh, this poem has an underlying. So these 2 lines, of course, talk to each other. Oh, how I loved her. It's true, but perhaps I love her. And he got that right. We use a different word for that. This is where it dawns on him that he hasn't stopped loving her, and which adds to the heartbreak. And maybe he struck me as, kind of like, maybe I love her. It could sound like it could be kind of a throwaway thought, but perhaps I love her. It just sounded a little more elegant to me, but love is so, I use brief because short can mean a lot of different things, but brief refers to time. And forgetting is so long.
Sean?
Yeah.
Sean, is this line telling us this is his first sexual experience? He's remembering.
Oh no! You can go there if you want, and you're welcome to think that. I don't see it quite that way because this probably was his first girlfriend, yeah, and they've gotten together a bunch of times. Because he talks about nights like this when we got together. But the briefness of it, how many of you have ever thought that if you were in an amazing relationship and it ended, how many of you thought it was too long? If it was good, like right up to the end. I don't mean if you let it linger for 3 years and you were in hell. But so love is never long enough. Okay, so it's too brief.
Sean.
Yeah.
Throughout the poem, we have a love poem, and there are layers to the physical and the emotional, etc., and the types of bonding. And on the one hand, I see what you were saying about the level of sexual expression. Mm-hmm. There also, it seems to be, and it may be the time and writing in Spain, a reticence that we might not see if he were writing it today.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, he's very discreet about what he's discussing. He's not pouring out any details about his urges or what he wants to do to her or anything like that. He kept this very elegant and very tasteful, which I think is perfect for the fact that he's lamenting so deeply. I mean, his heart is breaking and he makes our hearts ache And I think it's just magnificent. And this is interesting because forgetting is so long. This is not must not be the translation I saw. I wonder if one of these other ones has it. Forgetting, oblivion. Okay, look at this. Love is down here. Love is so short and oblivion is so long. That's the only person who wrote it as oblivion. Olvido, if you look up the word Olvido in a dictionary, it's going to come across as oblivion. But oblivion is when you're not aware of something, right?
Right.
And so once you forget something, you're not aware that you don't know it because it's out of your mind. You can't think about it anymore. Okay. I thought Merwin had oblivion in there, or maybe I was just scouring the internet for various translations and found the one that said oblivion. But I talked back to the idea that oblivion would work here, and it doesn't. What's problematic for him is that he's waiting to forget. He's waiting for her to go out of his head, and it's not happening, and so it takes forever. And I said in my manuscript that line 28, love is so brief and forgetting is so long, is really an encapsulation, a summation of the human condition, because we never have enough love, and we have so many things that we wish we could forget and we can't. And they linger and linger and linger. And then Neruda took two lines. On nights like this, I held her in my arm. See, it's interesting. Through nights like this one, and down here, through nights like this one. Okay, that's what he did. I'm the one who changed it because I only said on nights like, I did say on this one. Never mind. Okay, I held her in my arms. My soul will not accept having lost her. And so what he did was he took up here on, where to go? Okay, and that's like this one, I held her in my arms, and so my soul will not accept having lost her. That's the whole thing. He brings it, he summarizes the whole thing right here, and Merwin got it basically the same way I do. Though this may be the last pain she causes me, and I use causes because Neruda did, that she makes me suffer is maybe a little more clear. And these may be the last verses I write to her. I chose may in both cases because he uses the subjunctive. And the point is that he uses a subjunctive to shed doubt on what he is saying. This may be the last pain she causes me, parenthetically, but I doubt it. These may be the last verses I write to her, but I doubt it. And it's not, because he then goes on to write the Song of Despair about her, which is the coda to the Book of 20 Poems, the cycle. And so I thought I got that a little more clear by saying maybe, as opposed to though this be, which sounds almost like a royal fiat. This will be the last. So I liked maybe a little bit better. So as you can see, there are areas in which I disagree with him. And I do actually talk in my treatise gently about why I chose things. And then after I got what I thought was the words, the meanings, then I looked at it and said, does this sound at all clunky? And I have to tell you that I think, and they shiver blue the stars in the distance does not sound like good English poetry. And they shiver blue those stars in the distance. Once again, it is a little clunky there. He did fine with it. The blue stars shiver in the distance. Stars shiver. and they're maybe bluer than typically. I don't know, whatever. And he did a pretty good job of not having clunky lines like on some of the others have some really real doozies. My sight tries to find her as though to bring her closer. Hear the vast night vaster without her. Well, yeah, okay. Her voice, her bright body, infinite eyes. Now the one on the left, her voice, her fair skin, her enormous eyes. Her fair skin, that's the one by a native Spanish speaker. And where's the other one? Enormous. It works well for the eyes. I like that. But what it means is she would just sit there and gaze at him. So her steady eyes. Since we're approaching the hour mark here, let me tell you a little story. At a prep school in Minnesota, I taught a course. I was asked if, for the people who were really advanced in Spanish, if I could create a lit class, and I did. And I'd gone through a lot of stuff. And this is obviously, it was going to be one of the things that I taught. And so I taught them the poem in Spanish, and I told them that I had written a work to explicate the poem for English-speaking audiences. Although I can also translate it back to Spanish, ironically, and have everybody enjoy the thing. And I said, and the primary translation is by one of the greatest poets ever, W.S. Merwin. And he messed it up. So here we are, we're talking about this. Let's say we're talking about this in October. And I had a colleague in the English department who was bringing poets to our school. He brought Billy Collins.
Oh.
Billy Collins and W.S. Merwin in the same year, okay? Merwin, he brought Merwin. And when my student Roberto was talking to Jeff Johnson, the professor, the teacher, he said, yeah, we went over a Merwin translation of Pablo Neruda. And Jeff said, don't bring that up. And so Roberto, of course, raised his hands, and I saw Jeff go, no. And Roberto said, what about your translation of Neruda's poem 20? And I went up afterward to tell him, sorry, my student ragged on your translation. I mentioned a couple of words that I thought could have been translated better. And he said, yeah, you know what happened? I said, what happened? He said, I had a draft and a final version. And some idiot took the draft and gave it to Farrar Straus. And that has become the canonic version. This was his rough draft.
Oh, gosh. Oh, that's horrible.
He didn't. This is not the one that he consulted with a native speaker on. Nothing.
Sean?
Yeah.
Would you be willing to read the entire Spanish poem? I would love to hear it.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. I taught a 300 level lit class at Indiana University once, and I told my students that I was really feeling the poem at the time. I hadn't yet started writing the book, but I told them I would give them 10 points of extra credit if they would learn this poem from memory and write it on their final exam. And like out of 20 students, I think 18 nailed it. So they took the time and did the work. So I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and listen so that there's no other sensory input, okay? Puedo escribir los versos más tristes esta noche. Escribir, por ejemplo, la noche está estrellada y tiritan azules los astros a lo lejos. El viento de la noche gira en el cielo y canta. Puedo escribir los versos más tristes esta noche. Yo la quise y a veces ella también me quiso. En las noches como esta, la tuve entre mis brazos. La besé tantas veces bajo el cielo infinito. Ella me quiso. A veces yo también la quería. ¿Cómo no haber amado sus grandes ojos fijos? Puedo escribir los versos más tristes esta noche. Pensar que no la tengo, sentir que la he perdido, oír la noche inmensa, más inmensa sin ella. Y el verso cae al alma como al pasto el rocío. ¿Qué importa que mi amor no pudiera guardarla? La noche está estrellada y ella no está conmigo. Eso es todo. A lo lejos alguien canta. A lo lejos. Mi alma no se contenta con haberla perdido. Como para acercarla, mi mirada la busca, mi corazón la busca, y ella no está conmigo. La misma noche que hace blanquear los mismos árboles. Nosotros, los de entonces, ya no somos los mismos. Ya no la quiero, es cierto, pero cuánto la quise. Mi voz buscaba el viento para tocar su oído. De otro, será de otro, como antes de mis besos. Su voz, su cuerpo claro, sus ojos infinitos. Ya no la quiero, es cierto, pero tal vez la quiero. Es tan corto el amor y es tan largo el olvido. Porque en noches como esta la tuve entre mis brazos, mi alma no se contenta con haberla perdido. Aunque este sea el último dolor que ella me causa, y estos sean los últimos versos que yo le escribo. The end.
That's wonderful.
That, you know, there are so many points in this poem where you can just see the battle in his heart and in his mind that I typically don't read with major emotion poetry. If I'm reciting something, I recite it, but this deserves a little bit of let's not call it histrionics, some inflection, right? Okay, I'm ready for the questions, and then I would love to play you at least a little bit of the Neruda reading his own poem. Okay, questions.
I will start just by saying two things that you've really convinced me of and helped me to appreciate. One, I read your article.
Okay.
And I think it was W.H. Auden who once said, "How do I know what I think until I see what I have to say?" And you showed me a layer in the poem that it would have taken me a while to come to, and that is, I hear the voice in the poem saying, "How do I know what I feel until my verses explore my feelings?"
Yeah.
And I really, it's subtle in the poem, but it's definitely a thread throughout the poem and a theme. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Secondly, we started with Frost's comment. In your discussion especially, you convinced me that you have a command of the subtlety in Spanish and made the distinctions that really warranted a rewrite of that poem. Yeah. And thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, Merwin rewrote it himself, you know. So I just helped him out.
Okay.
But yeah, I think of course, I was just hearing something on NPR about everybody thinks their version of everything is correct. And I think, I did my darndest to create the best possible English version of that poem. And that's all I can do. So, yeah.
So in writing the poem, did you make a decision right from the beginning that you weren't going to try to keep to the 14-syllable formula or even the sessuras?
There was no way.
Did you try that at first and decide it wasn't going to work?
I didn't even try. Well, let's put it this way. Puedo escribir los versos más tristes esta noche. There's your 14. Tonight I can write the saddest lines. Da 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 da. I didn't have 5 other syllables to be able to slam into that. Oh, I want to mention one thing. I took a translation course at Indiana University, and the professor said there are a lot of times that it's really hard to get the essence of a line. And you would know this. We all know this, okay? But check this out. One line of poetry that has been considered untranslatable from Spanish to English. Fue una noche oscura. The translation is, it was a dark night. But if you listen to the musicality of the Spanish,
Yeah.
Fue una noche oscura. I mean, it's gorgeous. And then it was a dark night.
Yeah.
It just, you can't do it. And I tried to give beautiful words in English, but there was no way to reproduce the glory of his poem.
Interesting.
Do you feel successful in reproducing the glory of his poem as you have translated in general?
I did my darndest, and I think that if you read, that people who read my version of the poem cold are going to understand what he was trying to say better than any of the other translations. But I look at my translation and I haven't been able to find any way to improve it in a long time. I've made a couple of tweaks here and there over the years. So I think it's the best I can provide to the public. But I think that if there were a way to get the rhyme and the rhythm together with clear words, it would be closer to perfect, but it's a conundrum that I don't see being solvable. So all I can say is I did the best maybe that could be done.
This is a long shot question.
Hmm?
Was Neruda aware of translation of his poetry? Of course, not yours. And did he express any thoughts about the quality of the translation?
That's really a good question. I've worked with Spanish language writers who knew English well enough that they could make comments on my work. I don't know how good Neruda's command of English was, for starters, and I'm sure that book was translated, this book, since he wrote it in 24, I'm sure it was translated well before, when he was at the height of his career. But I've never come across anything about his commentaries. That would be lovely to see. And I need to make a note. Neruda reaction. I'm going to see if there's anything about that. That's a brilliant thought, but I haven't come across anything yet.
Well, your comment about the quality of his English was one, of course, that's a huge factor.
Well, yeah, I have friends who write thrillers, and they say, well, I got a copy of the Czech translation of my book, and they don't know what they said. They have no freaking clue at all. So that's a little more extreme than Neruda not having any acquaintance with English, but holy cow, if somebody translated my book to Czech, I'd be like, Godspeed, hope for the best.
John,
Yeah.
John, this has been really helpful today in terms of the questions that I have. And my questions are always around, I use big words, the morality, the ethics of translation. And first of all, it's helpful when you said you didn't try to match the rhymes or the syllables.
Yeah.
I guess I assumed that that was just a requirement, and your decision said, I can't do that. So understanding now that you were more faithful to the intent of the poem because you didn't try to get to be completely faithful to the mechanics of the poem.
Yeah.
That was helpful.
Well, all 5 of the translations that were presented on the screen today, nobody tried to be poetic. I mean,
I would
rhyming
be
or anything.
interested in hearing the difference, as you understand it, between translation and interpretation.
Well, my whole 112 pages is an interpretation. The translation is just an extremely small piece of that, but there also were choices made. So what you have in my case, well, in all the cases of all 5 of those, is an attempt to render not just an excruciating word by word translation, but to interpret what Neruda was probably intending to say and trying to use the exact English word that would give you that meaning. So like when I said her pale body as opposed to her bright body, and I was justified when I looked at the native speaker who translated it and said her light-skinned body or whatever that person said. He was commenting on the creamy whiteness of her skin. He wasn't saying that she glowed in the dark because of a nuclear accident, you know? And so it was I had to interpret his word, claro, and decide if it referred to skin tone or something about an aura that she gave off. And I said, he's just talking about the fact that she's not a brown-skinned half Indian girl. Somebody would say to me, why do you use estar here instead of ser, B versus B? And I'd say, well, in this case, what you have is somebody's emotional state, and that's not part of their natural essence, not part of their permanent being, and so you're going to use estar. And the native speaker would say, well, that's how we do it. And you don't get enough class time to absorb how we do it. And then, and another thing that's an issue is that anybody who gets a minor in Spanish at Western can then become a high school Spanish teacher. And if they can't articulate to students why you do something when they ask, then you are going to wind up with less and less understanding of the underpinnings of the language, which we see in English when schools essentially stop teaching grammar, how deeply that has affected our people's ability to articulate things. Might have a lot to do with why so many people fell prey to Trumpism. Just a complete misunderstanding of language and an inability to catch bullshit when they see it.
Yeah.
You just pleased every old teacher of grammar.
Yeah, I mean, I had great grammar lessons when I was 4th, 5th, 6th grade, and it came in handy when I was teaching Spanish, and I have to teach English grammar to people when we get to direct and indirect objects. A native speaker is not going to do that because they don't know how to articulate what those are unless they studied grammar. But I studied the grammar of the language, and I know what a direct object is, an indirect object, and I explain what they are in English, but I also show them how they work when you do them in Spanish. So yeah, very unfortunately, you need to be lovely to have a balance. My best bet would be learn the nuts and bolts of the language from somebody who can articulate it, native or not, and then go study abroad to really soak up how the language speaks in a living, breathing scenario. That's what I did, and it worked great.
So it seems to me, first of all, the most ridiculous thing I've heard today, I think, is the line when someone says you can translate anything as long as you've got a good Czech to English dictionary or Yugoslavian to, that just struck me as absurd.
Yeah.
So it's seeming to me that you could not do a good interpretation. No one could do a good interpretation unless you knew the author well, unless you had studied. If there is no such thing as just saying, I speak good Spanish, I can just do this cold.
I completely agree with that, because if you haven't read the 19 poems prior to this one in this book, you do not know that he is has talked about her creamy skin before. You wouldn't know. He said one poem is "Me gustas cuando callas." I like it when you're silent. And it's not. You need to shut up. It's I love it when you are quiet because your mind is elsewhere. And I know you're thinking about some fascinating thing that I just want to know about later, when you come back. And so he was really immersed in this woman by the time she bailed. And we see that she bailed because he got too intense and she was not there.
Can I take it one step further and then
Please? Yeah.
But do you need to study him, not just his work?
Well, it sure helps.
Not just knowing numbers 1 through 19, so 20 makes sense. But Merwin, where he lived and what he did, and
I point out
nature.
Yeah, well, I point out that here he is, and probably if there's a field, he's in rural Chile in 1923, and so there's no high-powered halogen night lights, or utility poles hanging around. So the sky is completely lit up with stars. It's like probably close to white with stars, like when you look through a telescope. And he hears someone singing in the distance, which means that everything is dead silent to where somebody who's off singing in the distance can be heard by him sitting out in the field. And so, in my interpretation of the poem, I took into account his the milieu, the time period, the location, the lack of electric light to disturb his vision of the sky, and we know it's not cold because there's a coldness because he's isolated. There's this gulf between him and the girl, and there's a gulf between him and the stars, and that distance parallels the distance he is experiencing with her. She might as well be as far away as Alpha Centauri because she's not here and she's not coming back. And so, all that went into my every word choice. Every bit of that stuff was in my mind the whole time. I sort of went into this trance while I was writing this and imagine myself, and I still do right now, I imagine myself in the field, looking up at the sky, looking around, seeing trees that have star shine on them, and etc. And then hearing off in the distance, and that's not his girlfriend.
John, I have maybe a two-part question, but probably two separate questions. I'm very interested in the composition process. Bob, how can you gauge how long it took you to start and complete this translation? And secondly, we've been talking recently about the degree to how is one's work affected by compensation. And my version of that question for you is, to what degree is your work in translating Neruda, is it part of your professional obligation, and to what extent is it avocation?
All right. Those are two super duper questions. Let me answer the second one first, please. So here we have a guy who's out of grad school, has gotten a job in Minnesota. But it was not a tenure track job, so I had absolutely no publication obligation. Also, I'm a writer by vocation. Anyway, I write fiction. I have a nonfiction memoir about a traumatic brain injury and recovering from that. And this could very well be the next thing I put out. I got this onto the desk of Jonathan Galassi, the president of Farrar, Straus and Giroux. He said he found it very delightful to read, and it's saleable, but their audience, the audience for Farrar Straus books, was a little too academic for them, but they'd love to see other things from me, and they wished me well with this document. They were sure I'd find a publisher. Okay, so, but did I write it to get money from it? No. I wrote it because it was this big burden on my heart to create the best possible translation of the poem, and also because I had experienced so much joy from reading it and meditating on each line that I wanted to write out that meditation for people so that other people could enjoy. Now, you said that the line 14 that I gave you, it gave you some new insights, yeah?
Yeah.
So if I accomplish that with one line, multiply that by 32, and I hope all lines would give you something else, something new to think about with that poem. But so I did it to get it out of my heart and my head. Kind of like when you have, you're poets. And so when you have a poem in your mind, you just got to write it, right? Because otherwise it spins and spins. Well, this thing, even though I didn't write the original, I had my whole mind, my whole meditation on it in my head, and I really needed to get it out. And so I did it just to silence my brain. And of course, I wanted to do it as well as possible, because the goal would have been to let other people see what I had to say about the poem in case it could help them enjoy the poem more. Yeah.
Sean?
Yeah, Lynn.
All poetry, I believe, is a conversation.
Oh, yeah.
We're having conversations with a poet. We are having conversations with other people who have translated the poem. We're having conversations with readers. How do you view the conversation? What does your translation add to the conversation?
Well, I'd like to hope it adds clarity about Neruda's original meanings. I hope that it shows how nuanced the work was, because if you do a jackhammer translation, if you could take his poem and put it in Google Translate, why don't you do that and see what happens? You have the original now. Put it in Google Translate and compare it to my translation. I'm going to do that after this and see what the heck happens.
Sean?
Yeah.
Who I call my genius friend, that I'm so glad to be on the earth at the same time and our lives crossed.
That is a somewhat long nickname, but yeah, I love that.
But that's the title I give you before, and have to shorten it. I am so glad to hear you today. And if I'm understanding this, when you're doing a translation of this poem, you are not bringing in a psychoanalysis of the poet or the situation, or assuming that you agree or disagree with his politics. You are looking at the images on the page and the and that's what you're I'm trying to describe it. Is that correct? Is that a
That is correct, because he is an extremely politically charged individual. He was exiled a couple of times from Chile because of the Marxist views that he took on. This book of poetry, when he was 19, is late Romantic poetry, and then there's this dividing line where he was writing his elemental odes and the Song for the Americas, which talks about the worker and all this stuff. And so he's very, and to a small degree, he kind of repudiated his early Romantic work because it was not utilitarian, which is what a good Marxist would do. And that made me sad, but he also didn't, demand that everybody burn the documents. So thank goodness. But so at this point, there isn't any there are no politics in the poem, but I also refrained from saying, who knew that someday he was going to become the voice of the common man when he's writing this stuff. I just thought there wasn't any need to go there, because when he was 19, he wasn't there. And also, another thing about him is that he was a notorious womanizer. Every woman in the world, he looked like he resembled it to a small degree Alfred Hitchcock, and yet every woman wanted to bed him. And I don't know what kind of magic was there. It must have been because he was very courteous and his speech was very elegant or whatever. He must have used his words very, very well, but he certainly had that going on. But what's interesting to me about this particular poem is that you see underneath that veneer of, I'm Pablo, you get to see a young man who's brokenhearted. And so going into the soul crushing evening when she didn't show up for their date, when he got stood up and he knows that she has abandoned him. And he didn't know in advance because he went there. Well, you could also think, well, he went there because he was hopeful, or he went there just to reminisce. But I think he didn't know. I think he was stunned, and he's lying there, hello, oh man, crap, she's not coming.
Walter Isaacson's biography of Einstein tells us that Einstein, when he was young, was Hollywood handsome, and also very interested in women, and women were very interested in him. He got into other areas as he got older, but it's reminiscent.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, these major figures. There must be something about being that big in your field, or that smart, or whatever that is a magnet. And okay, as long as you're not hurting anybody, I suppose.
Well, Sean, others may still have some questions. This was a treat. We've been meeting for over 5 years, and this may be the only meeting that I've not had the most to say, and I really enjoyed it.
I'm honored. I really appreciate it. Well, it was an honor just to be invited, because I know a bunch of you, and to be asked to speak with authority on something in this crowd. I was a little twitchy there for a few seconds after I got the email, but because
you were equal to it.
Oh,
we'd love to invite you back to all the time to join our group.
Well, you say that, Lynn. Let's have a vote. You all want me to come be part of this?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Well. Okay.
You've got the link. You saw the schedule.
Yeah.
Come on over. Anybody can come on over. Well, not just anybody.
Well, not just anybody.
Not just anybody.
No.
Linda has a comment.
Yeah, this is my comment. This morning, Amory got up earlier than I did. And when I wandered out into the living room, she was sitting in the chair with all of the reading material on her knee and so forth. She didn't even say good morning. She said, I've been wanting to talk about this topic of translation forever. And so then we went back and forth a little bit and talked about the poems. And I asked her which translation she liked better. She said Sean's. And I agreed too, because there's a certain, I only took 1 year of Spanish, so I know nothing, but there's a fluidity and a sense of insight in your translation. And
Well,
I appreciate that you did it.
Thank you.
So I still have a question.
Yeah.
Over the years, maybe for 40 years, I was the person who made decisions on hiring faculty. And other people on the committee would be very happy if we interviewed a native speaker. Mm-hmm. As I supervised people over the years, I became somewhat more wary because native speakers I found in the classroom were sometimes less tolerant of the learners, and I don't want to say glib, but the language was so automatic for them that they would not slow down the learning process. So one, have you learned your Spanish from both native speakers and non-native speakers? And do you have an observation about what I said?
Yeah, my high school language courses were all non-native speakers of Spanish, French, and German. My college grammar courses, I didn't do in Spanish and French, I didn't do the low-level language classes with instructors. I went straight into the literature course level. And so I worked with native speakers who were teaching literature. And I think native speakers who are professors do a magnificent job of teaching literature.
We have a couple more minutes. If you all will bear with me, I'd love to hear Sean's observation about another question.
Sure.
There are Asian speakers who can hardly speak a word of English who are finishing PhDs in math and the sciences at Johns Hopkins and other places, where apparently they've tried to weigh heavily on not just the quality of the person's usage, but their ability to learn in English. And I've thought that we've not sorted that issue well in baccalaureate education. That is, we put a lot of onus on a non-native speaker to demonstrate their proficiency in using the language well, and we've not learned how to gauge how well people can learn in the language, even if they're timid about using it.
Yeah, I could see why if somebody comes over here from any country and doesn't want or can't somehow master English as a tool for articulation, why you might not want to put them in a class as the sole teacher of a math course. But I think that math is a language. And so you don't really have to learn English to be able to understand the symbology of math. And so you should be able to let people study here without ever getting proficient at English, and then they can go back home and teach in their native tongue, which is perfectly fine with me. Yeah. So if we're going to gauge everything on can you speak English, well, what about English math students who want to learn at the best Chinese university? They probably could get away with just going over there, and people would try to work with them, and not require them to become proficient in Mandarin to do it. So.
Thank
But
you.
we're very Anglocentric here when it comes to the language, and that's not done us any good. So, want to hear Pablo?
Please.
You're gonna find this, I hope, amusing.
Puedo escribir los versos más tristes esta noche. Escribir, por ejemplo, la noche está estrellada y tiritan azules los astros a lo lejos. El viento de la noche gira en el cielo y canta. Puedo escribir los versos más tristes esta noche. Yo la quise y a veces ella también me quiso. En las noches como esta la tuve entre mis brazos. La besé tantas veces bajo el cielo infinito. Ella me quiso. A veces yo también la quería. ¿Cómo no haber amado sus grandes ojos fijos? Puedo escribir los versos más tristes esta noche. Pensar que no la tengo, sentir que la he perdido, oír la noche inmensa, más inmensa sin ella. Y el verso cae al alma como al pasto el rocío. ¿Qué importa que mi amor no pudiera guardarla? La noche está estrellada y ella no está conmigo. Eso es todo, a lo lejos alguien canta, a lo lejos. Mi alma no se contenta con haberla perdido. Como para acercarla, mi mirada la busca, mi corazón la busca y ella no está conmigo. La misma noche que hace blanquear los mismos árboles, nosotros los de entonces ya no somos los mismos. Ya no la quiero, es cierto, pero cuánto la quise. Mi voz buscaba el viento para tocar su oído. De otro será de otro, como antes de mis besos. Su voz, su cuerpo claro, sus ojos infinitos. Ya no la quiero, es cierto, pero tal vez la quiero. Es tan corto el amor y es tan largo el olvido, porque en noches como esta la tuve entre mis brazos. Mi alma no se contenta con haberla perdido, aunque este sea el último dolor que ella me causa, y estos sean los últimos versos que yo le escribo.